The Rings of Power, also known as the Great Rings, are fictional magical artifacts in J.R.R. Tolkien's writings about Middle-earth, especially his high fantasy book The Lord of the Rings. The ruling ring first appeared as a plot device, a magic ring in his children's book, The Hobbit. Tolkien later gave it a backstory and much greater power, as well as 19 other rings that it could control, including the 3 rings of the elves, 7 rings for the dwarves, and 9 for men. A key story element in The Lord of the Rings is the addictive power of the One Ring, made secretly by the Dark Lord Sauron, while the 9 rings enslave their bearers as ringwraiths, Sauron's most deadly servants. Proposed sources of inspiration for the Rings of Power range from Germanic legend with the Ring and Varanort and eventually Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, to fairy tales such as Snow White, which features both a magic ring and 7 dwarfs. One experience which may have been pivotal was Tolkien's professional work on a Latin inscription at the Temple of Nodens. He was a god hero linked to the Irish hero Nuada de Ergetlam, whose epithet is Silver Hand, or in Elvish, Celebrimbor, the name of the elven smith who made the Rings of Power. The inscription contained a curse upon a ring, and the site was called Dwarf's Hill. The Rings of Power have been described as symbolizing the way that power conflicts with moral behavior. Tolkien explores the way that different characters, from the humble gardener Sam Gamgee to the powerful elf ruler Galadriel, the proud warrior Boromir to the ring-addicted monster Gollum, interact with the One Ring. Tolkien stated that The Lord of the Rings was an examination of placing power in external objects. Fictional history. The Rings of Power were forged by the elven smiths of the Noldoran settlement of Eregion. The smiths were led by Celebrimbor, the grandson of Fina, the greatest craftsman of the Noldor, working with dwarves from Khazad Dum, Moria, led by his friend Navi. Sauron, powerful and ambitious, but humiliated by the fall of his evil master Morgoth at the end of the First Age, had evaded the summons of the godlike Valar to surrender and face judgment. He chose to remain in Middle-earth and seek dominion over its people. In the Second Age, he arrived disguised as a handsome emissary of the Valar named Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, offering the knowledge to transform Middle-earth with the light of Valinor, the home of the Valar. He was shunned by the elven leaders Gil-galad and Elrond in Lindon, but managed to persuade the Noldoran elves of Eregion. With Sauron's help, they learned to forge Rings of Power, creating the 7 and the 9, while Celebrimbor created a set of 3 on his own. Sauron left for Mordor and forged the One Ring, a master ring to control all the others. In the fires of Mount Doom, when the One Ring was made using the Black Speech, the elves immediately became aware of Sauron's true motive to control the other rings. When Sauron set the completed One Ring upon his finger, the elves quickly hid their rings. Celebrimbor entrusted one of the 3 to Galadriel, and sent the other 2 to Gil-galad and Círdan, in an attempt to seize all the Rings of Power for himself. Sauron waged an assault upon the elves. He destroyed Eregion and captured the 9. Under torture, Celebrimbor revealed where the 7 were, but refused to reveal the 3, toward the end of the Second Age. The Númenóreans took Sauron prisoner. Sauron however managed to corrupt the men of Númenor, leading to their civilization's eventual downfall. The exiled Númenóreans who survived, led by Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, established the realms of Arnor and Gondor. Together with the elves of Lindon, they formed a last alliance against Sauron, and emerged victorious. Isildur cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand and kept it, refusing to destroy it. He was later killed in an ambush, and the ring was lost for centuries. During this time, the elves were able to use the 3 rings, while the 9 given to the leaders of men corrupted their wearers and turned them into the Nazgul. The 7 given to the dwarves failed to subject them directly to Sauron's will, but ignited a sense of avarice within them. Over the years, Sauron sought to recapture the rings, primarily the 1, but was only successful in recovering the 9 and 3 of the 7. During the Third Age, the One Ring was discovered by Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit, and a fellowship was formed to destroy it, led by Bilbo's heir Frodo. Following the successful destruction of the One Ring and the ultimate fall of Sauron, the power of the rings faded. While the 9 were destroyed, the 3 were rendered powerless. Their bearers left Middle-earth for Valinor at the end of the Third Age, inaugurating the dominion of men. Description: as observed by Saruman, each ring of power was adorned with its proper gem, except for the One Ring, which was unadorned. The One, unlike the other rings of power, the One was created as an unadorned gold band, though it bore Sauron's incantation, the Rime of the Rings. In the Black Speech, it became visible only when heated, whether by fire or by Sauron's hand. As the other rings were made under the influence of Sauron, the power of all the rings depended on the One Ring's survival. To make the One Ring, Sauron had to put almost all his own power into it. When worn, it enhanced his power. Unworn, it remained aligned to him unless another seized it and took control of it. A prospective possessor could, if sufficiently strong, overthrow Sauron and usurp his place, but they would become as evil as him. As the One was made in the fires of Mount Doom, it could only be unmade there. Sauron, being evil, never imagined that anyone might try to destroy the One Ring, as he imagined that anyone bearing it would be corrupted by it. The 3, named for the 3 elements of fire, water, and air. The 3 were the last to be made prior to Sauron's solo creation of the One. While Celebrimbor forged the 3 rings alone in Eregion, they were molded by Sauron's craft and were bound to the One. Only after Sauron's defeat, when the One Ring was cut from his finger at the end of the Second Age, did the elves begin to actively use the 3 to ward off the decay brought by time. They are Narya, the Ring of Fire. The Red Ring was set with a ruby. Its final bearer was the wizard Gandalf, who received it from Círdan at the Grey Havens during the Third Age. Nenya, the Ring of Water. The White Ring, the Ring of Adamant, was made of mithril and set with a shimmering white stone. Galadriel used it to protect and preserve the realm of Lothlorien. Vilya, the Ring of Air. The Blue Ring was the mightiest of the 3. It was made of gold and set with a sapphire. Elrond inherited Vilya from Gil-galad and used it to safeguard Rivendell. The 7. Sauron recovered the 7 rings from information provided by Celebrimbor, and gave them to the leaders of the 7 kindreds of the dwarves. Durin's folk, Firebeards, Broadbeams, Ironfists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots. Though a tradition of Durin's folk claimed that Durin received his ring from the elven smiths. Over the years, Sauron was able to recover only 3 of the 7 rings from the dwarves. The last of the 3 was seized from Thrain II during his captivity in Dol Guldur. Gandalf recounts to Frodo that the remaining 4 were consumed by dragons. Before the outbreak of the War of the Ring, an envoy from Sauron attempted to bribe Dain to Ironfoot of the Lonely Mountain with the 3 surviving rings and the lost realm of Moria in exchange for information leading to the recovery of the One Ring, but Dain refused. The 9. Sauron gave 9 of the Rings of Power to leaders of men who became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They gained unending lifespans and the ability to see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. One by one, the men fell to the power of the One Ring. By the end of the Second Age, all 9 had become invisible ring wraiths, the Nazgul, Sauron's most terrible servants. In particular, they helped him search for the One Ring, to which they were powerfully attracted. Powers. The Rings of Power were made using the craft taught by Sauron to give their wearers wealth and dominion over others. Each ring enhances the natural power of its possessor, thus approaching its magical aspect, which can be easily corruptible to evil and lust of domination. Gandalf explains that a ring of power is self-serving and can look after itself. The One Ring in particular can slip off treacherously to return to its master Sauron, betraying its bearer when an opportunity arrives. As the ruling ring, the One enables a sufficiently powerful bearer to perceive what is done by means of the lesser rings, and to govern the thoughts of their bearers. To use the One Ring to its full extent, the bearer needs to be strong, and to train its will to the domination of others. A mortal man or hobbit who takes possession of a ring of power can manifest its power, becoming invisible and able to see things that are normally invisible, as the bearer is partly transported into the spirit world. However, they also fade. The rings unnaturally extend their lifespans, but gradually transform them into permanently invisible wraiths. The rings affect other beings differently. The 7 are used by the dwarven bearers to increase their treasure hoards, but they do not gain invisibility, and Sauron was unable to bend the dwarves to his will, instead only amplifying their greed and anger. Tom Bombadil, the only person unaffected by the power of the One Ring, could both see its wearer and remained visible when he wore it, unlike the other rings. The main purpose of the 3 was to heal and preserve. As when Galadriel used Nenya to preserve her realm of Lothlorien over long periods of time. The 3 do not make their wearers invisible as they were made without Sauron's direct involvement, but can render themselves invisible to all but another ring bearer. The 3 had other powers. Narya could rekindle hearts with its fire and inspire others to resist tyranny, domination, and despair. Nenya had a secret power in its water that protected from evil, while Vilya healed and preserved wisdom in its element of air. Analysis. Plot device to core element. The One Ring first appeared in Tolkien's children's fantasy The Hobbit in 1937 as a plot device. A mysterious magic ring which the titular character had stumbled upon, but its origin was left unexplained. Following the book's success, Tolkien was persuaded by his publishers Allen and Unwin to write a sequel. Intending to give Bilbo another adventure, he instead devised a background story around the ring with its power of invisibility. Forming a framework for the new work, he tied the ring to mythical elements from the unfinished manuscripts for the Silmarillion to create an impression of depth in The Lord of the Rings. Gollum's characterization in The Hobbit was revised for the second edition to bring it into line with his portrayal in The Lord of the Rings as a being addicted to the One Ring. Tolkien's conception of ring lore was closely linked to his development of the One Ring. He initially made Sauron instrumental in forging the rings. He then briefly considered having Fëanor, creator of the Silmarils, forged the Rings of Power. Under the influence of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, he settled on Celebrimbor, a descendant of Fëanor, as the ring's principal maker. Under the tutelage of Sauron, Morgoth's chief servant, while writing the lore behind the One Ring, Tolkien struggled with giving the Elven rings a special status, somehow linked to the One, and thus endangered by it, but also unsullied, having no direct connection with Sauron. By the time he was writing the chapter, The Mirror of Galadriel, Tolkien had decided that the 7 and the 9 were made by the elven smiths of Eregion under Sauron's guidance, and that the 3 were made by Celebrimbor alone. He considered setting the 3 free from the One when it was destroyed, but dropped the idea. Tolkien's posthumous works including the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle-earth offer further glimpses of the creation of the Rings. Inspiration. The Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey thought that Tolkien's work on a Latin inscription at a Roman temple at Lydney Park a pivotal influence, combining as it did a god-hero, a ring, dwarves, and a silver hand. The god-hero was Nodens, whom Tolkien traced to the Irish hero Nuada Egetlam, Nuada of the Silver Hand, and the inscription carried a curse on a stolen ring. Silver Hand is the English translation of Celebrimbor, the elven smith who made the Rings of Power, in association with the dwarven smith Narvi. The temple was at a place called Dwarf's Hill. Magical rings occur in classical legend in the form of Plato's Ring of Gyges, which grants the power of invisibility to its wearer. Though there is no suggestion that this influenced Tolkien, he was certainly influenced, however, by Germanic legend. Andvaranaut is a magical ring that can give its wielder wealth, while Draupnir is a self-multiplying ring that holds dominion over all the rings it creates. Richard Wagner's opera series, Der Ring des Nibelungen, adapted Norse mythology to provide a magical but cursed golden ring. Tolkien denied any connection, but scholars are agreed that Wagner's ring powerfully influenced Tolkien. The scholar of religion Stefan Arvidsson writes that Tolkien's ring differs from Wagner's in being concerned with power for its own sake, and that he turned one ring into many, an echo of the self-multiplying ring. Magic rings are a frequent motif in fairy tales. They confer powers such as invisibility or flight. They can summon wish-granting djinns and dwarves. Indeed they may, writes the Tolkien and feminist scholar Melanie Rawls, identify the enchanted princess, hold the tiny golden key to the secret room, give one the power to transform oneself into any form, animal, vegetable, or mineral, duck, lake, rock or tree on a plain, and so escape the ogre. As Tolkien was well acquainted with fairy tales like the Brothers Grimm's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which involves a magic ring, Jeanette White from Comic Book Resources suggested that his choice, to gift 7 rings of power to the dwarf lords of the 7 kingdoms, is probably no accident. Symbolism. According to the scholars of philosophy Gregory Basham and Eric Bronson, the Rings of Power can be seen as a modern representation of the relationship between power and morality, remarking that it portrays an idea that absolute power is in conflict with behavior that respects the wishes and needs of others. They also observed that several of Tolkien's characters have responded in different ways when faced with the possibility of possessing the One Ring. Characters such as Samwise Gamgee and Galadriel have rejected it. Boromir and Gollum were seduced by its power. And Frodo Baggins, though in limited use, ultimately succumbs to it, while Tom Bombadil can transcend from its power entirely. They also noted out that for Tolkien, the crucial moment of each character in the story is the moment in which they attempted to use a ring, a choice which will determine their fate. The science fiction author Isaac Asimov described the rings of power as symbols of industrial technology, while Tolkien denied that The Lord of the Rings was an allegory. He stated that it could be applied to situations and described it as an examination of placing power in external objects. In a 2019 article published by Kaspersky Lab, Nikolai Pankov analyzed Sauron's efforts to dominate or ensnare the bearers of the Rings of Power from a modern perspective, with reference to the context of Tolkien's enthusiasm in the field of cryptanalysis as well as his participation in a language course run by the Government Code and Cipher School during the late 1930s. Pankov used analogies to real-world information security terms such as supply chain attacks, phishing techniques, and botnet software to describe the struggles between Sauron and the various ring-bearers who are representatives of the free peoples of Middle-earth. In adaptations, Ralph Bakshi's 1978 animated film The Lord of the Rings begins with the forging of the Rings of Power and the events of the War of the Last Alliance against Sauron, all of which are animated in a silhouette against a red background using rotoscoping. The forging of the Rings of Power opens the prologue of Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings film series in 2001. The Fellowship of the Ring. The 3 elven rings are shown being cast using a cuttlebone mold, an ancient casting technique. These were given to Gil-galad, portrayed by Mark Ferguson, Círdan, Michael Ellsworth, and Galadriel, Cate Blanchett. The Tolkien illustrator, Alan Lee, employed as a conceptual designer for the films, had a cameo as one of the 9 human ring-bearers who later became the Nazgul. Sauron, Sala Baker, is seen forging the One Ring at the Chamber of Mount Doom. The One Ring was also shown to have the ability to adjust in size to the finger of its wearer, such as when it became smaller to fit Isildur. Harry Sinclair. In the extended version of the film, Galadriel also properly introduces Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, to Frodo. In the concluding sequel, The Return of the King, 2003, the final wearers of the 3 rings, Gandalf, Ian McKellen, Elrond, Hugo Weaving, and Galadriel, appear openly at the Grey Havens wearing the 3, with Galadriel proclaiming the end of its power and the beginning of the dominion of men. 4 rings of power appeared in Jackson's The Hobbit film series. In An Unexpected Journey, 2012, the One Ring was found by Bilbo Baggins, portrayed by Martin Freeman, in the extended version of the succeeding film The Desolation of Smaug. 2013. Gandalf discovers that Sauron took the Ring of Thor, a dwarf lord, from Thrain, Anthony Sher, who revealed in a flashback scene his possession of the ring during a siege of Moria. In the concluding film The Battle of the Five Armies, 2014, Galadriel, Blanchett, reveals Nenya in rescuing Gandalf. McKellen, from Sauron, Benedict Cumberbatch, aided by Saruman, Christopher Lee, and Elrond, Weaving, who is wearing Vilya, the Ring of Air. in the 2014 video game Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. The wraith-like spirit of Celebrimbor, fused with the body of the ranger Talion, recalls how Sauron had deceived him into forging the Rings of Power. In the sequel, Middle-earth: Shadow of War, Celebrimbor forges a new Ring of Power unsullied by Sauron's influence. See also the Palantir, indestructible crystal stones that enable their users to see past and future, and to communicate with users of the other stones. The Silmarils, jewels crafted by Fëanor, Celebrimbor's ancestor, giving their name to the Silmarillion. References. Primary. This list identifies each item's location in Tolkien's writings. Secondary. Sources